We bring you inside a place where women are under siege. It's been called the most dangerous place on earth to be a woman.
Regreso a información de nuestro país. En Guerrero, las autoridades precisaron que hay al menos 4 personas implicadas en el asesinato de la niña ayer.
La siguiente historia que le voy a presentar es verdaderamente terrible.
In that year, Brazil has the highest number of femicides at over 1,200. It's followed by Mexico, Argentina, and Honduras.
But away, it's only 2,000 miles from Texas, which is why thousands of women are fleeing to our shores to escape a machismo culture racked by gang violence. We bring you to Honduras to
investigate. President López Obrador attempted to address these grievances in his morning press briefing, but failed to announce any concrete measures to combat rising violence against women.
Madre e hija fueron asesinadas en el municipio de Acajete.
Me preguntaron mi nombre y también mi procedencia. Yo le dije soy de Juarez. Ahí no piden licencia.
In this poor neighborhood in the outskirts of Ciudad Juarez, 8 young women went missing from 2008 to 2018. Ciudad Juarez is considered to be one of the most infamous cities of femicide in all of Latin America. This term femicide was coined in 1976 by Diana Russell during the proceedings of the First International Tribunal on Crimes Against Women in Brussels. The goal of this new term was to raise awareness surrounding the violent death of women, and was meant to be distinct from the term homicide, which is a gender-neutral term. This term femicide had a purpose that was rooted in politics. As Weil and colleagues explain, it intended to produce effects in the prevailing manner of understanding the violent death of women and produce changes in the social order which legitimized or tolerated those deaths. The word feminicidio in Spanish is often used in place of femicidio to describe the violent death of women and girls because it recognizes the state and public institutions as relevant factors in femicide. According to one report, in 1995, 2000, and 2005, Ciudad Juarez had the 3rd to 4th highest record of femicide in Mexico. However, it is important to note that to date, the city lacks official data collection. So why is it that Ciudad Juarez stands out when it comes to femicide? Well, as Neil and colleagues explain, institutions and individuals fail in a state where the Weberian consensus about the monopoly of violence is not successfully controlled by the state. Ciudad Juarez is an example of a case that effortlessly reveals the effects of impunity in a context of a failed state. But, of course, Mexico is not the only Latin American country that is home to femicide, and this leads us to the bigger question. Why is femicide more common in Latin America versus elsewhere in the world?
Latin America is home to 14 of the 25 countries with the highest rates of femicide in the world. To understand why women are facing deliberate killings and violence, it is important to identify the deep-rooted causes. Being surrounded by a patriarchal society with a machismo culture, violence is often normalized. According to a recent report by Oxfam, 86% of young individuals residing in Central America throughout 8 different countries stated their friends would not intervene if their girlfriend was hit by an acquaintance. Overbearing attitudes towards women and being labeled as inferior creates a power imbalance. Sexual harassment, domestic abuse, and sexist remarks are condoned in everyday life, meaning women are left vulnerable to extreme forms of violence that can possibly lead to femicide. Organized crime is another factor. Many women have been caught in the crossfire during vengeance killings due to gang-related activity concerning a male family member or spouse. They undergo sexual assault, are beaten, mutilated, and left to die. Those who partake in organized crime themselves are assigned dangerous duties, like the consumption of narcotics for distribution, and have the risk of unfortunate consequences. On top of this, human trafficking ties in with the mentioned factors. Women are forced into the sex trade and subjected to torture, rape, and inevitably death. Victims linked to sexual exploitation rose from 55% to 75% in the time frame of 2014 to 2016. Having a society where attitudes towards violence against women is so apathetic encourages this behavior. However, inadequate legal and criminal response on the part of the government remains as one of the most detrimental causes of femicide. Countries throughout Latin America have recognized the growing number of femicides occurring and have criminalized the offense with harsh penalties. For example, Mexico has a sentence of 40 to 60 years, Honduras following with 30 to 40 years, and a common trend of an average prison sentence between 20 to 40 years in multiple nations. Unfortunately, cases of femicide have substantially increased. Despite having laws created, there is no real implementation by law enforcement or the judicial system. Impunity, lack of thorough investigations, and insufficient resources are the reason why many women haven't received justice. Women have repeatedly spoken to police about incidents concerning domestic abuse or being in harm, but their pleas are often ignored. During investigations, there are constant delays, lack of forensic testings, or hostility towards victims. In 2019, 3,142 Mexican women were killed, but only 726 cases were considered femicides. Some judges participate in victim blaming and take part in gender bias. They tend to lean in favor of the male. Corruption in the legal system leaves women unprotected under the law. When cases are dismissed or the guilty is given a lighter sentence, the cycle of violence repeats without any repercussions.
Protests have been instrumental in addressing femicide through furthering social and institutional progress in Latin America. After the first publicized instance of femicide occurring in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, groups of women in the community have since formed organizations to address this crisis. For example, the group La Coordinadora de Organizaciones No Gubernamentales en Pro de la Mujer, which is the coalition of non-governmental organizations for women, is an example of a well-known female organization that formed during this period to address the growing crisis of femicide in their community. Groups like this have been instrumental in making progress in addressing this issue. Prior to the first publicized incident of femicide occurring in Ciudad Juarez, women in Latin America have been demanding justice for gender-based violence for quite some time. For example, a group that has been very influential in shaping modern anti-gender violence organizations and anti-femicide protests have been the Las Madres de la Plaza. They have greatly influenced the style, dynamics, and strategies of modern Latin American women's organizations and protests who continue to carry on their legacy today. More recently, this past March in Mexico City, there was a mass strike of tens of thousands of women who protested the lack of attention from the Mexican government in regards to the ongoing violence and disappearing of women triggered by the murders of Ingrid Escamilla, age 25, and Fatima Cecilia Aldret, age 7. These murders started a national debate and many protests in Mexico. However, these protests were not just exclusive to Mexico. With the increased rates of domestic violence due to COVID-19, and with the help of social media and the Me Too movement, more social change in regards to gender-based violence is starting to take form in Latin America. Some countries, such as Peru, have come up with concrete national plans to combat gender-based violence. However, not all Latin American countries are at this stage. Thus, the importance and reasoning behind protesting. In the past few years, social media has become an instrumental form of protest, especially today, with the lack of mass mobilizations due to COVID-19.